Is a relationship breakup like grief? Sometimes it's said that grief only really happens with the death of a loved one. But of course, wherever there is any sort of loss, like a relationship breakup or the breakdown of a marriage or a divorce, there's going to be a loss that involves the need for mourning and grief. There can be grief for the past, the memories that feel like they've been lost, or sometimes people feel because a relationship has broken down, it sort of annihilates and doesn't give validity to what's happened in the past. There can be grief for the loss of hopes and dreams and the future. Of course, there can be grief for the loss of the person involved, and the fact that they are no longer in someone's life, particularly if you've had a close relationship and done a lot of things together. But even so, there will be that mental and emotional gap that's left, and there can be grief for that gap. And there can also be the feeling of the loss of self. Loss of self in the relationship, loss of self-identity, and that can cause confusion and grief. There can also be a grief for not necessarily just the person that's been lost, but the idea that they represent, which is a relationship in a society that values relationships and values stability and long-term relationships. There can be grief around all of those things. And it can be particularly difficult compared to the loss of somebody by death. A relationship breakup is different in that sense because that person is still around and you can see them maybe on social media, or if you have children, or maybe you're sharing pets, then there's still that need to have contact. So that can be a reminder of what has been lost. So the other thing I'd say is it's also okay to grieve for a relationship breakup, even if you knew that relationship or that marriage wasn't healthy and was unhappy, because there's still the loss of the hopes of what it could have been, or what you would like it to have been, or what you hoped it could have been. As well as the main grief around those things that we've just talked about, there can also be secondary griefs. Things like there's the loss of perhaps the home, the family home, a loss of finances. Pets may need to be shared. There can also be grief around trust and friendship groups that can take a blow. Maybe some friends move on. There can also be loss of time with children where there's shared custody and maybe having to share self-care with somebody else that you maybe don't know very well or at all. So that's loss of time with your children. And all those things need to be acknowledged and accepted as a major life change and a loss of the life that was once known. Sometimes, or very often, if the grief is too much to bear, we can try to avoid it by asking questions like, why did it happen? I don't understand. And the drive to understand and ask those why questions is a way of trying to avoid facing what is actually happening. And that can be a form of denial, because those questions are very often ones where there actually is no answers. It may simply be that somebody has changed their mind. And we can maybe, because of wanting to avoid that loss and that grief that comes with it, start to bargain for a relationship and put so much effort into it that we lose our self-identity, and we're the ones carrying that relationship at the expense of our own self-care. But by allowing that grieving and mourning process to happen, it allows those feelings to move through until you can get to that place of acceptance of what is happening. And when you get to that place of acceptance, then there can be not only hope, but then optimism for the future. You can then start to reach out to other people because you're acknowledging that there is the loss, and you can maybe reach out to friends or family or even some professional help to help move and speed up that process and just get to that comfortable place that little bit quicker. And of course, the main thing to hold, if you possibly can, is that just as much as this is the end of a relationship where there is grief and sense of loss, but developing optimism and hope for the future and developing of a new self-identity, that gives the opportunity for a new beginning. So if you can see it as a new beginning, just as much as it is the end of something as well, that can be really helpful. So relationship breakup can absolutely feel like a grief-ridden situation.